So I like to joke that at age 6, I started in the alternative education world where I've been working ever since.
You're not going to believe this. It's still not live. It says we're live, but it's not
Mhm.
live. This is really bad. Like, this is never, and like the history of my podcast. Oh, wait, there we are. Now we're there.
Now we're there.
Okay, now I see us. It
Okay.
was saying like live in 115 minutes or some craziness. And now there's people.
Awesome.
Audience, I
Hello.
am so sorry. This is a StreamYard thing or a YouTube thing, not a reason we learn thing. Not sure what happened there, but it literally glitched and did not go live when we were live the first time at the hour. And then we had to redo the broadcast, and here we are. So let's keep going. So Hannah was just saying before you were able to join us that she's been homeschooled since she was in first grade. Okay. How did your parents make that decision? What did they
Yeah.
always know they were going to do that?
No, it was my dad's idea first. And as my mom tells the story, she was pretty quick to get on board too. I remember the process of my parents deciding to homeschool me because, like I said, I went to a private preschool and kindergarten, so I was already like technically in the standard school system, even though the school I was going to was like, it was small. There were like 25 kids across 3 years, 2 years of preschool and then kindergarten. And it was like very Montessori inspired. So it was like very different from the standard system, but I was still doing the normal thing of like, you get up in the morning, you pack your lunch, you go to school. I was
But in
3
your
when
house.
it started. So like I was on the standard track. But I was 6 when because my birthday's in October, so I was like on the older side of
Yeah,
the
my eldest
grade
daughter's like
spectrum.
that. October
Yeah.
baby. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was old enough to remember the process of my parents talking about maybe homeschooling me. Um, and it was a process that, as I remember it, I feel like it lasted most of my kindergarten year, where they were trying to figure out, because the school that I went to, it only went through kindergarten. So they were trying to figure out what came next.
Right.
And I remember we went to visit a whole bunch of different schools, and I got like at the ripe age of 6, I got a pretty like full scope tour of the education system because we went and checked out a lot of different schools. We went to, I think we visited 2 different Waldorf schools. We visited multiple like hybrid schools where you go for a couple days a week and then part of the time you're homeschooled. We visited some like local private schools. We visited some like more innovative, like project-based type private schools, and we went to the local public school. And I remember when we did the public school, I remember it was right at the end of the school year. And the day that my mom and I went to visit, I remember they took us in, and I thought the whole thing was just like, it was this huge building. It was so weird. And I remember we went and sat in the end of year math test for first grade. And the private school that I had been in was teaching all of the same stuff that they were doing in first grade. So I was able to answer all the questions in the end of year math test. And my parents were just like, we can't send her here. She'll be incredibly board. So
What
public school
state
was ruled
was
out.
this? What
It's
what state were you?
Pennsylvania. I grew up in
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania,
Okay.
kind of a mediocre school district. And the Waldorf schools were like an hour drive each way. There were like other things that were like not a great fit about the other schools that we were visiting. And so
Well,
my parents just became more and more sold on the idea of homeschooling me.
so that sounds like your parents were pretty picky as far as, and in a good way, meaning like
Mhm.
they were looking at this as I often tell people on my, show, I say, a lot of people put more effort into choosing their next car than their child's school. And it sounds like your parents went about it the way I would hope all parents go about it, which is to say, all right, let's look at all the possible choices. And I know people immediately rule out private schools because they say, well, we can't afford it. But the reality is, you really don't know until you go and you look and you apply. There are scholarships, there are different things that you could potentially do, financial aid, payment plans. So, I mean, the benefit of looking, at least, is what you like, what you don't like, what, you get to see what the different options are like, whether or not you can take advantage of them or not. I don't know. That's a secondary, thing, but you at least look. right? And the other thing I was hoping you could do is help people understand what is Montessori, what is Waldorf, what, because we toss around terms, those of us who know these things, we forget that a lot of people don't know what they mean. Like, what is Waldorf? What's a Waldorf school, right? So if
Yeah.
you could help us out with that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I'm going to speak to both of the points that you just made, actually, because one of the things that was really cool about what my parents did is that even though they decided that for a lot of reasons, some of them financial, some of them time commitment, some of them just like not feeling like a fit, they ruled out all of these options, but they also drew things from some of these different options that they liked. And one of the schools that my mom really, really liked was the Waldorf school. And Waldorf schools are pretty expensive. And again, it was like an hour drive each way to get to the school. So that would have been like 4 hours of commuting a day. It's just not at all feasible. But my mom really loved Waldorf education. And Waldorf is a school philosophy that was founded originally by Rudolf Steiner. It's a German, it originates in Germany, I believe. And it's a very beautiful education system. So there's this whole philosophy around how kids learn and like what the ideal kind of developmental process for kids is that the school is built around. So it's this very beautiful education process where you have kids work with a teacher all the way through first through eighth grade. So you have a teacher who starts with you in first grade and you work with that same teacher across all 8 years. So you're able to build a really strong bond with the person who's your facilitator and your mentor and your guide. And they have a really strong emphasis on art and play and hands-on projects. They use like the toys in a Waldorf school are all made out of wood and wool. They don't have plastic. The crayons that they use in their art classes are made out of beeswax. Like it's a very beautiful sensory experience. Like they use really rich colors and they like in the classes, the way that the curriculum is set up, they have, subjects that you're learning each year, but the way that you learn those subjects is you study these different topics. So for example, one year you're studying astronomy and one year you're studying Norse mythology. And so when you're digging into these subjects, you learn about them and then you write essays and you create illustrations and you make these lesson books. So when you're studying astronomy, you might do a section on the solar system and you'll draw, like you'll learn about each planet and then you'll draw an illustration in this lesson book. And their lesson books are beautiful too. Like they're beautiful paper and they have onion paper in between the pages. So like nothing smudges. And on one side, you'll illustrate, like you'll draw a picture of each planet. And then you'll write an essay about what you learned about that planet. And so you're getting this sort of both like very visual and also very auditory and very like anchored in multiple ways kind
It's
of
kind of like multimedia, multi-sensory, but
yeah,
also you're using both sides of your brain.
yeah. And
Because
then
if you're drawing and you're writing and so you're drawing on both sides of your brain while you're learning, which is great. And we have a tendency to sort of favor, one side or the other, or be a little bit stronger than the other. And this kind of sounds like it helps you, make sure you don't lean too heavily on one thing than the other. So you have more options.
Yeah, and then you learn how to like summarize all of this stuff that you're learning and anchor it, and then you have these lesson books to reference back. And my mom loved that. So my elementary education, even though we did it at home, was very Waldorf inspired because we went and visited the school and we loved it, and we went to their store and we bought some of the beeswax crayons and some of the lesson books.
Right.
And then when we were doing school at home, we were using that same process where she'd look at the Waldorf curriculum and she'd be like, okay, in fourth grade, I think fourth grade might have been Norse mythology for history. I don't remember like the specifics of each year.
Right.
But she was like, okay, this year we're doing Norse mythology and we're going to go read the Norse myths and we're going to do these lesson books. So I think it's really valuable for people to go explore these different options because there's kind of this fallacy that you have to just pick one. And that's really not true for most kids. The optimal system is actually kind of a hybrid of a lot of different things. So you find what fits for both the parent and the kid. And then you can adopt a lot of these different things from different schools as you're exploring into and implement them all into whatever system you decide to go with, whether it's homeschooling or whether you choose a school and then you supplement that with a bunch of different other things for your child.
Did your mom work?
No. So this is another thing. So my dad was self-employed. He had a construction business when I was in like when all of this was happening, and my mom worked for him, and they made the decision that they were going to cut down on, they were going to go to like one income household because she wanted to be home with myself, and my sister is 6 years younger than I am. So um when I was like in first grade, she was still a baby. So they decided like that was the priority, was having mom be around for us, even though it meant making some sacrifices financially, which is another place that I think a lot of people get hung up on education. They're like, well, we both are working, so this isn't possible. And I know a lot of people who've homeschooled as single moms too. Like there's a lot that you can do to make this work. But for my parents, it's just like in the hierarchy of priorities. Yeah, we could have two new nice cars, or we could have our kids educated in the optimal way by having mom at home doing it herself. And that's what they decided they wanted.
Right. And then, of course, you know what everybody asks. I'm sure you've been asked this 100 times. Did you have no friends? Like, how did you make any friends? What did you do? Were you locked in the house all day? You know,
Yes, it
like,
was
were you
horrible. No.
weird? Are you weird? She's not weird, guy. Look, she's so not weird. But I mean, but you know, Pennsylvania, I'm not sure exactly where you live. You don't have to tell me, but I'm just saying, you know, it's not like there are thousands upon thousands of homeschool families next to every other homeschool family, right? You know, we're not
Yeah.
Amish. So
No.
so how did you guys go about dealing with the socialization question?
Yeah. This is funny because I just wrote a thread for Rebel Educator this morning about socialization
Saw
and all of
that.
the
Yeah.
fallacies around it.
Yep.
Because the socialization argument is for public school is awful, because just as many kids are harmed by public school socialization as are benefited from it. And like true well-rounded socialization really has nothing to do with the things that you learn in school. Like being a well-rounded human interacting in the real world does not equate to sitting in a classroom with 30 kids that you have nothing in common with except your academic aptitude and your birthday.
Right.
It's a very strange, contorted system for kids to be learning how to socialize in, and it's also often very, very cutthroat and very cruel.
Right.
But yeah, most homeschoolers that I know, like, yeah, there are weird homeschoolers. There are also weird public schoolers. They're just weird people who aren't like, as socially adept. It's just across the board, regardless of your education background. But most homeschoolers I know are actually, I think, far better socialized than most public school kids because they got a much
Right.
broader range of experiences and
Right.
social interactions. Like you learn more, quite honestly, spending a day in the life in the real world with a parent where you're like going to the grocery store and you're learning how to have an exchange and interaction at the cash register, and you go to the bank and you watch how that process unfolds, and you like go to a different store and you're talking to the person who works there.
Yep.
Like you're learning more that's like actually a transferable skill than you
Yep.
ever would in school. But
So true.
the
How the
friends
real
thing can
world
definitely
works
be,
too, where
yeah,
things come
exactly.
from.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is very important context to have alongside all the theory that you're getting in school. But in terms of friends, there's a lot of options out there for homeschoolers. So over the course of my 12-year homeschooling career, there's a lot of different things that we tapped into. There are a lot of like lots of homeschoolers congregate into homeschool co-ops and homeschool groups, and we went to quite a few of those over the years. And they're like a couple different, like some of them are just purely for social purposes, but a lot of them are parents pooling resources to hire teachers for different classes too. So I would take drama classes and Spanish classes and science classes and classes with the naturalists at the county park, and like different classes like that that were facilitated by these homeschool groups that like no single parent is going to want to pay for hiring that person as a tutor, but you can set up a class. So
People don't necessarily know that. Like, for example, when I started homeschooling locally in North Carolina, I tapped into some Yahoo groups and, you know,
mhm,
stuff and where what is there? And it got to the point where I was so overwhelmed with options, I had to pick and choose. Whether it
yeah,
was, you know, I could have gone to park day every single day. So I had to pick which ones did I like, you know, which park did I want to drive to, how far, et cetera. And then the nature centers. if you live in an area that has at least one, if not multiple parks, and they have any kind of a nature center, like a place with little exhibits of bones and fossils and junk, very often they have programs, and you might be surprised to find out they have homeschool programs. They have during the day little ranger programs where they do science classes specifically for homeschool. We have one, and it was super popular, and you actually had to hurry up and get signed up because it would get full, but kids could go and meet all ages, like right down to the itty bitties, all the way up to sort of a junior ranger class for high
Mhm.
school kids. The why here also. Now, I'm not saying this is everywhere, but I think people don't realize like how many of their local things they're either already paying for through their taxes or that just happen to be situated there in their town have stuff for kids and for homeschool people. So it's worth
Yeah.
looking.
There's a lot out there, and I don't know if this is true in every state. It was true in Pennsylvania. Um, Homeschoolers often also have the option to use the different resources at the public school. In Pennsylvania, the rule was as long as there's room in any class or any activity, so like a class isn't full or a sports team isn't full, you can go opt into any of those individual resources that you want to. So quite a few homeschoolers I knew played sports at the local school.
Yeah.
And when I was in high school, I duly enrolled for a semester and took a class at my high school because I was very curious to know what high school was like. Spoiler, was awful. I never wanted to go back, but I'm really good. It was one of the most valuable things I ever did in high school because it gave me that perspective. But you can take classes at your local school, and I knew a bunch of homeschoolers who did that too. You
Yeah.
can
And
join
there's
the
also
CETA
dual
program.
enrollment at community college too.
Yeah, and community college and trade school and other things that you're interested in. So there's so many options out there, both extracurriculars and also things specifically for homeschoolers,
Mhm.
that it's very easy, honestly, to tap into a community. And I think it's much easier now than it was when I was homeschooling because like 10 to 15 years ago, there was a much smaller number of homeschoolers. And I think the census data for this year is that 11% of all kids are being homeschooled, which is so exciting. So
Yeah.
exciting. But also that means that there's tons of different homeschoolers to make friends with, even without tapping into your local resources. And the internet has changed everything too. There are so many online courses that you can take and different communities that kids can join that even if you're in a rural area, it's still possible for kids to make friends who have shared interests. You're not limited to like, okay, I live in a town of 500 people, so if I don't go to the local school, I'm not going to make any friends. Like you can still, there's still ways to connect with people that
Right.
allow you to find like people that you really jive with, which is who you want to be friends with anyway. So
Right.
like there were definitely rough patches in my homeschool experience where we'd go through phases where I'd have a hard time meeting people that I got along with and making friends. There were a couple barren patches where I had a couple friends, which was a little rough because I'm fairly extroverted, so I like people. But I'm not sure that that would have been different if I was in public school anyway, because I just had really niche interests. So it took a while to find people who shared those.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm also, I think that those periods also kind of solidified my okayness with chasing the things that I'm interested, even if it means that nobody else is going to get it for a while. And that's also a really important life skill to have.
That's a really good point too, is, being able to be alone is in a good way, like in a
Mhm.
constructive way, by choice.
Mhm.
One thing that I didn't like about school, because I went to Montessori school, and it's funny, guys, that I'm sort of the opposite of Hannah in that I'm the epitome of a schooled person. So she got to be homeschooled all the way through. I did get to go to Montessori for sort of nursery and early elementary school, and I did love it. I absolutely loved it. And I have very fond memories of my very early childhood education, which I think had a huge influence on me in terms of my reading ability and all that kind of stuff. But public school was a nightmare. One of the reasons I decided to become a public school teacher was I wanted to make it not a nightmare for other kids because I absolutely hated it. And one of the things I hated most was that social component. I hated how you wrote about this today in your Twitter feed, how artificial it was, how you feel this pressure to have friends and have a certain number of friends and almost have like a posse of friends and not go anywhere alone, like not even to the bathroom. Like you have to travel almost like in a little pack. This I think is a little more of a girl thing than a boy thing. Sorry to be sexist, but there it is. It's just something I've observed. And you immediately get the message, and I don't think this has changed, that what is okay is determined by somebody else, and it's never you. It's kind of like if you've ever seen the movie Mean Girls, you'll understand this. And I think this is even true for boys. There's some mystery force out there deciding what the right clothes and shoes and hairstyles and attitudes and vocabulary and all that are, even the right people to be friends with, who, like, and if you step outside that line, across that line, you're going to get smacked down really fast. And sometimes you don't see it coming. And so that's where, they've made movies generation after generation. They make these Hollywood movies about the kid on the outside of it or whatever, who's just perplexed by the whole thing. Like, who makes these stupid rules and why isn't it me? So, if you're one of those people who is adept at either making those rules somehow, commandeering everybody's attention and doing it, or just sliding right in and conforming, maybe it's not a big deal for you. But I would say probably the vast majority of kids are not. They're trying to fit in. And why? That's not the real world. And as much as there's some call for conformity in the real world at work and things like that, you still have that option to leave. I don't like this workplace culture. These people are really snobby about clothes and makeup and this and that. I don't like this whole feeling. I go to work every day and I feel judged. I'm not going to work there anymore. But when you're a kid, you're kind of stuck. So I just think it's arbitrary and forced. And I think parents either forget how awkward they felt if they had that kind of experience and hope it'll be better for their kids, or they just think somehow it's a rite of passage. Like everybody should go through this. And I'm like, why? What's the upside? I don't look back and go, well, that made me a more neurotic, anxious person. I mean, it didn't make me a better person. It really didn't.
Yeah, I think that's true for a lot of people. Some people thrive in the public school environment. Either they get really lucky and they have a great group of friends, or they get really lucky in a different way and they're at the top of the pecking order, or they have the type of personality where they can just kind of be aloof to it all and not really be bothered by it. There's, a lot of variation depending on the type of personality and the specific circumstance. But it's definitely something that for a lot of kids is actually really scarring. Like, we wonder why we have such an epidemic of mental health issues like depression and anxiety and self-esteem issues, some of which can be incredibly harmful to an individual. And you look at the environment these kids are in all day, and it's like, well, no wonder they're stressed out about school, they're stressed out about social life, and they're in this environment that is really quite pointless when you think about it from a big picture, long-term perspective, because it really doesn't translate to how the real world works. And if it does translate, like you said, like there's probably a problem in the real world situation that you're putting yourself in. Right. So
how many times have you heard the expression peaked in high school?
A lot. It makes me sad.
We used to joke. I worked in HR for 2 years as an HR generalist for a company, a financial services company, and they hired me because of my background in teaching, because they wanted me to design some training stuff. But initially, I was in sort of the interviewing and stuff side, and I think it comes by it honestly a little bit. This notion that the people who go into HR and who are in that sort of power position were, the popular girls in school, or they were, there was a lot of that. There was a lot of that kind of, I don't know. We used to use that expression at work a lot. Like, oh, he peaked in high school, she peaked in high school. It was like people who can't let it go. Yeah. They were accustomed to being at the top of that pecking order. They go out into the world and maybe they recreate it somehow, but it's not necessarily a great workplace. It's not a place that works well.
No, if you go back to first principles of like what skills you actually have to have and what assumptions you need to have about how you're interacting with the world around you to live a good life and to have success and to have meaningful relationships and to have productive relationships, nothing that you learn in traditional school is going to translate over into, like, if you go back to, if you take the Descartes approach where you're like, I'm going to strip away everything that I know, and I'm going to go back to, like, I'm going to go ask all the fundamental questions and figure this out for myself. nothing that you learn in traditional school would stick, because it's all counterproductive. Even the whole, well, actually not even, especially the whole deferring to authority thing, where you have to raise your hand to ask for permission for anything. And if your teacher says that this is a bad idea or this is incorrect, then you just accept that. That's not how the real world works. The people who are successful in the real world are the ones who question those things and then go do the things that they want and take what they want. So everything that you're learning in school is backwards. So the socialization argument is, it kind of makes me laugh because it seems so absurd to me, but also I know that it's a really real sticking point for a lot of people. So it's something that, it's a conversation that needs to be had again and again and again, because it's a really huge issue.
In the real world, you negotiate for what you want. And that opportunity is not available in school.
No.
And people might say, well, you can't negotiate an A or this or that. And I'm like, well, but think about it for a second. Why is there an A? Like, why is there grades? And like, you're not against grades. No, I'm not against standards. But think about it this way. Why do you send a kid to school? To learn things, right? To learn and to develop skills and to grow, right? So shouldn't the metric be, did they learn it? Do they know it? Do they know do they know how to do the thing they're supposed to know how to do? Are they able to apply that knowledge in any meaningful way? If they're able to conceptualize anything in any meaningful way, you can figure that out and then just check a box and go, check, done. Does it, I mean, whether it's, wow, they're superior to everybody else, is that really why you sent them to school, to be rated against everybody else, or to learn how to do the thing? Now, yes, some people will do the thing better than other thing, but if they can do it, isn't that the goal of the school? It's like, yes, your child can read, check. Yes, your child can do math, check. Now somebody's Einstein and somebody's just balancing their checkbook. But why is that information necessary? And you say, well, they get into college, go to that. Well, couldn't the college then administer an exam? Couldn't the college then say, that's great that you know how to do math and you know how to read and everything, but now we need to administer this particular test to you to see if you can do the thing as well as we need you to do the thing to be qualified to do it here. That's a completely different thing. Now you're talking about a credentialing process that is very important, because you have very real world consequences. Oh, I'm sorry, the bridge I designed for you fell down. The airplane doesn't fly and I can't do brain surgery. Okay. But that can be decided when you're not 10 or 12 or even 18. That can be decided for at the next step. What I've found is that when you tell the kid who's 10, you're like, oh, this is an A and this is a B and this, you're adding a dimension to the learning that just doesn't really help with the learning. And it doesn't even help with the teaching. I think having a rubric that says, this is actually proficient, this is what it means to be proficient at a thing. Okay, now we're moving on, is enough. I don't need to divide my class by super proficient and just regular proficient. And what we've ended up having now is, with the grades, we've lowered everything to like, not proficient really at all, but tried really hard. And, it's like we've brought it all down here. So it's even more meaningless because now they can't even do the thing.
Right. And they also start to identify with whatever grouping they get put into. So you'll get kids that are perhaps brilliant from an emotional intelligence standpoint. Exactly. Or from some other soft skill. They would be brilliant people managers or brilliant operators of a very large organization, but they're not great at grammar and math, in not even on a long-term time horizon, but in the timeline that school has arbitrarily stated is the average, and therefore is how we measure everyone. And so they end up put in these like not as advanced classes, and they just think they're dumb. Right. And that's so tragic, because there's so much human potential that's getting lost from kids accepting these identities really early on of being a certain thing that is entirely untrue. I've known kids who were 8 years old when they finally reading clicked for them, and then they went on to become total bookworms and write books of their own. But it took them years for them to be ready, and the traditional school system would have just labeled them as effectively incompetent in the realm of reading and put them in classes to catch up, and they would have had all these self-esteem issues that come around that. They would just think they weren't readers. And that's really sad. And it's really ineffective. And there's also so much about how the school system is structured that, again, doesn't map well to the real world, not just the grading, but also the way things are tested. Like the fact that everything is just, you have to cram this, memorize it the night before, you go take the test. A month later, you've forgotten it all, but you got the score on the test, and that's what matters. But you're not allowed to like reference any of your resources or anything when you're taking the test, even though in the real world, when you need this information in future, what are you going to do? You're going to go check all your notes, you're going to Google, you're going to assemble the information again, and that's actually the more relevant skill. But you're taught that that's bad somehow in school. There's a lot of things in the way the system is set up that's really, really ineffective. And I didn't really realize that until honestly after I graduated from high school. Like I kind of knew on a highly conceptual level that I was weird, but in like a really abstract way. Because I'd meet public school kids and they'd be like, so you like stay at home all day with your parents? And I was like, okay, so that's something that normal people think is weird, but I didn't really get it.
That you would be with your parents. Yeah.
Yeah. And that I wasn't in school. And then when I remember like adults always kind of being amazed at the homeschooling thing, but I thought it was more just like, they think I'm cool somehow. It was kind of like how my 8-year-old brain or whatever processed it. And it wasn't really till I went to the public high school and I dually enrolled that I was like, wait a second, this is what normal school's like? I kind of thought that they were doing the same things that I was doing, just in a group setting. I didn't realize how different my education was, but it really wasn't until I became an adult that it started to click for me just how much of this stuff is just kids are steeped in, and how much of that I had bypassed by not being in the system, and how different that made my internal operating system from the average. I had no idea. I remember I was even like early 20s and people would tell me I had weird ideas because I was homeschooled, and I was like, yeah, I don't believe you.
It's not weird as you had ideas. You had ideas of your own and you had to, express them probably. And as you said, there's a lot of human capital that just gets kind of wasted because it was never used. And, after I went to public school through 9th grade, we moved and I went to boarding school. I went to prep school. But that was a great thing because while it was school and it was a, formal institution, and everything, my classes were really small and everything was sort of seminar style with the exception of math and science, which were taught in a pretty, straightforward traditional way. But, how else are you going to teach algebra? Right. But I guess there are ways to do it, but I appreciate that they just taught us the algebra. And but in my English classes, history classes, all the other classes, we'd be sitting around and you'd have to do the reading. And you would have to be involved in these conversations. We would get into these deep conversations, and all the assignments were written. There were multiple choice. There was no lecture. There was none. It was just, okay, go and write a paper, go write an essay. We were writing essays like every single night. And then you'd have bigger papers to write. So I had to write so much. I had to practice expressing myself. I had to speak in front of other people sitting in the class and express my opinion. And you couldn't get out of it. You couldn't just sit there silently. It would be, what do you think? What do you think? And the only rule in the class was you weren't allowed to shout down or mock somebody else's idea. If you had something to say about it, you waited your turn, and then you could challenge it. You could argue with them. But you better bring it. The teachers were that way. It's like, okay, why do you disagree? Explain. And you'd be held to that. You couldn't just say you're an idiot or this. So you had to learn a little bit of logic and argumentation. And that was so important because, like you said, that's more what the real world is like.
Yeah.
And when I went to college, and I wanted to ask you in a minute about your experience with higher ed, but when I did go to college, which I, in retrospect, should not have done, just so you all know, shouldn't have done it. Big fat waste of 4 years with the exception of the year I was abroad. I enjoyed it and I learned a lot in terms of the academics, but it didn't move the ball forward as far as success in my life. And it was very expensive. But when I went, I was shocked at how childish so many of my classmates seemed. And that may sound really snobby, but first of all, I was immediately in sophomore classes because of AP stuff. And I had been on my own, being in boarding school and coming and going and doing my own thing. And these were people who had not been away from home ever. They had been in a class where they were told what to do, what to think. They weren't allowed to speak until they raised their hand and all this. And they just went wild. They were either drunk all the time or didn't show up to class, or they would go to class and sleep. And I remember thinking, like, this is college? I feel like high school was harder. This is the dumbest waste of time and money I could imagine. And this was a hard school to get into as far as, tests and grades and all this junk. And I just felt like I had gone backwards, which is why I say I shouldn't have gone, because I probably should have taken a year, thought about it. What am I going to do? And if I went, go with a purpose. Instead, it was like, what's the hardest school I can get into? Let's go. Dumb. But anyway, did you go to college?
I did not, which is like the other almost equally weird part to my story of as the homeschooling is. So backstory, I was a super, super, super academic kid. I loved school and I did really well with school. And in high school, a large portion of my homeschooled high school experience was just watching lecture series from the Great Courses or the teaching company. And which is effectively, for anybody who's not familiar, basically the teaching company contracts the best college professors in each field. They like go find the best in the world at medieval literature or oceanography, and then they'll record a lecture series with them. And it's like kind of continued learning content for adults, but it's college level work. And I was basically, for all of high school, I was like, I wanted to take 20 of these a year. I was so into it. If I could have, I would have taken their entire course catalog, and I had to pick, like 8 subjects a year or whatever, because reasonable expectations. And I was always sad about that. But I spent 4 years getting basically a college, like sitting in on college lectures. So I took like all kind of your standard science and math and history. And then I took as many electives as I could fit in. I took oceanography, I took anatomy, I took exercise science, I took medieval literature, I read the great books, I did like all of this stuff. And I thought for certain, and everybody around me thought too, that I was just on the college track. So I started looking at schools, because even though we'd accepted the premise that you don't have to go to traditional school to be successful, we hadn't yet shaken the premise that you need college to, like, it's just what you do.
Well, you need that degree.
Yeah.
Everybody knows if you don't have that piece of paper, forget about it.
It's just, and there's, there's the social network aspect, and there's the like setting up your career network. There's all these different pieces to it.
Very expensive network.
Exactly. Well, we'll get to that part.
Yeah, exactly.
It's this thing that just everybody kind of assumes you have to do. And I remember when I was a freshman, I was 15, my mom and I went to a college planning night at our local high school, because it was one of the, like, we were kind of tapping into the high school to figure out, okay, so what does she need to do to be ready to go on after high school? And so we went to this college planning night, and it was incredibly boring. They had a bunch of sessions on like prepping the financial side and college admissions and all of this. And they had a bunch of like representatives from different schools there. But I remember my mom and I went to this session that was about paying for college and financial aid. And because we knew, like, okay, you're going to need to either get scholarships, or you're going to need to like get some type of financial aid, because, single parent income for the past however many years, because we've been homeschooling you. We don't have tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to just throw at college. And I remember the visceral shock of seeing the sticker price for college, because I had no clue up to that point. And I remember the visceral shock of hearing this college planning advisor explaining how many tens of thousands of dollars you should expect to go into debt for a degree. And I remember going home and telling my mom, this feels like the dumbest thing you could possibly do as your first adult decision. Like, the first thing you're going to do, you graduate high school and you're like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go spend tens of thousands of dollars that I don't have. Like, it just didn't compute for me. And so there was always kind of this question mark for me about whether or not this was a good idea. Like, that planted the seed of doubt. But I still thought I loved school so much. I was watching all these college level lectures. I wanted to go do that in person with a whole bunch of other people who were as excited about it as I was, and with these professors in the same room as me, so I could ask them all of my questions.
Right.
And then I got a little farther along, and we were doing more research, and I started to realize the first 2 years of college is just gen ed requirements anyway. And I started to realize, wait a second, I'm going to it's actually going to be a step backwards to go from this high level of quality that I'm consuming now to having to go just like do a bunch of general stuff before I can get back to the good things.
And they make you pay.
And they make you pay everything because
And they
they're
make you
money.
pay. Go backwards. Yes.
And I started to realize that not only was I not going to get all of this cool stuff that I was doing now right away, but I also would have to pick a college that had like one of these professors that I really loved. And then everybody else there was just kind of going to be like, you know, whoever they had on faculty. So I wasn't even going to be getting the best in the field in every single field. I'd like could go to, I remember the guy who taught the classics, the great books course that I loved, taught at Kenyon College. And so I looked into Kenyon College because I so badly wanted to go to his lectures. And I was like, wait a second, there are hundreds of people attending his lectures. And there are also like, he has teaching assistants who are helping him. So it's not even like him all the time. So I like would barely get to talk to him. And everybody else at the school, like, I don't know who they are. They're just kind of like the generic professors that they have. And I'm sure some of them are great, but it's not like I get to go to my dream school where all of these people are like, in my head, college was this magical place where all the people who were just like me, I would finally get to meet them. Plot twist, I actually found them on Twitter later. Like that's actually where all the cool people were. And Twitter is free, so you don't have to pay for it. But I was like, this is where I'm going to find all the people who are weird and nerdy like me. And I get to go hang out with all these professors, and it's going to be just this like beautiful gilded institution of learning and exploration. And then this whole image that I had in my head just came crumbling down as I started to do more and more research. So eventually I was like, I'm more self-directed now than I would be in college anyway. This seems backwards. But I still thought I hadn't quite rejected the idea that I didn't need college. So then I was like, okay, I found a list of schools that I thought I'd be into. There was one that was like basically homeschooling through college. It's called Goddard College. And you have an advisor who you're working with, but you basically create your own coursework and then you go do it. And then your advisor like signs off on it and gives you the course credit. So I thought that could be cool. And then I really wanted to go to St. John's College, which is a classics college, because again, I was really nerdy and I liked the great books. So like I had a list of options. And then my senior year, I was just like, look, I don't need a college degree for anything that I want to do. I don't want to be a doctor. I don't want to be a lawyer. I absolutely don't want to be a public school teacher. I definitely don't need a degree to be legally able to do anything that I want to do. And I have no idea what I want to do. So spending a bunch of money on kind of an arbitrary career trajectory seems incredibly irresponsible. I feel like college would be a step backwards. And I feel like I can go build a successful career on my own. So basically I made up my mind when college application deadline came and I didn't apply to anything. I was like, I'm not going in the fall. And I decided I was going to do a 4-year experiment where I was going to see, because people told me I was insane. Like my extended family told me I was crazy. I was working my senior year of high school. I worked at a vegetable farm and orchard. Like a really super cool, we had like 400 varieties of apples. It was this very cool operation. We did farmers markets and CSAs, and there were a bunch of people who were working there who were college graduates, and they were all telling me, you're insane to not go to school. You have to get a degree. And I was like, but I'm working the same job as you. Like that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I can see. Wow, it's really helped you a lot.
They were all like, the experience, you need the experience. I was like, I'm in the same place you are. But
you could go to parties for free. Just get yourself invited to college parties. That's not that hard. If that's the experience they're talking about.
Yeah. So I realized that I didn't need it. And so I decided I was going to spend 4 years trying to see how far that I could get. And worst case scenario, I would be like the old kid in school, which is actually really not true because you get all ages in college. But I was like, well, I can suck it up and be a couple years older than everybody else in my class. I'll be fine.
Right.
So I decided I was going to see how far I could get without college.
Yeah.
And by the end of 6 months in, I was just like, this was the right choice. And I never thought about it again. Never questioned the decision, never second guessed it. So I would have been I would have been 22 when I would have graduated college. And at 22, I was working for a college alternative program as their program manager. I had a positive net worth. I had no debt. I was basically like living an amazing, super happy life, had a great career, great network, tons of friends, um, and had bypassed the entire college system. And again, like I
Right.
was making money. I had money in my bank account. I had some assets. I wasn't like, didn't have this huge amount of college debt that I had to factor into my budget for the next decade or more.
Right.
Um, so I remember it was actually pretty cool when I crossed that mark where I was like, I would graduate high school, or I would graduate college this year, and this is
Right.
experiment. It worked. I did it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's great. And now David's saying, but so many jobs require a degree.
That's
So
really not
many,
true.
yeah, there are so many corporate jobs and corporations that put degree required in their job description, but increasingly, thank goodness, they're finally coming around and they are removing that requirement in place of, they'll say like or experience or commensurate or experience, because they're having so much trouble finding people who have college degrees and the experience they want them to have. It's like they
Mhm.
want unicorns, or they have people with college degrees they have to re-educate in some of the basics like writing
Yeah.
or whatever. It depends on the field, and of course, as Hannah mentioned, if you want to be a lawyer or a doctor or certain kinds of jobs, you do have to have that degree because you also have to go to graduate school. And we have yet to get to the point where the graduate schools are saying, you know what, you can come in, for example, you can take the LSAT, and if you get a high score, you can come to law school, and we're not going to care much about whatever your undergraduate degree would have been because you passed the LSAT. So
Which makes
you
way
can.
more sense, by the
It
way,
really
to do
does,
it that
because there
way.
really isn't an undergraduate major that prepares you specifically for the law. I mean, there are majors that, you might, for example, like poli-sci or economics or English or something that, maybe give you some skills or extra stuff, but they don't really specifically prepare you for that. If you can do well on the LSAT and you can do well in law school, like why shouldn't you be able to be a lawyer?
Well,
There are
also,
people who
it
take
doesn't.
the bar exam and they can pass the bar exam and they never went to law school. So,
Yeah, this idea that college has a monopoly on information
yeah, they don't.
is incredibly misguided, because
Yeah,
it doesn't. Like, there is no magical spell that is cast over college as an institution that gives it special power to bestow special information on its students that they can't get anywhere else. Like, you could
right,
literally learn anything else that you could learn in college elsewhere, even the stuff that, like, is considered like you have to go to school to be a doctor. It's
right,
not impossible to learn everything that a doctor knows outside of the school system. Like, yeah, you'd have to put in a lot of work and it'd be a waste of everybody's time probably, but like
right.
you could do it. It's not
Right, and here
this.
we have, so, Shio Sophia says, "Yeah, and some med schools are dropping the MCAT from consideration for the wrong reasons," and that we're seeing it ironically go the other way. Like there, as I said about, you could drop the grading and just give people like an exit exam to say like, all right, before we give you a diploma to say you finished high school, you need to take this exit exam where we test you on knowledge, like
Yeah.
things, and concepts and the ability to write and things like that. That I could see being actually quite useful. And
Yeah.
then you would really know that somebody was prepared to be graduated. The same thing as getting into the credentialing processes. Why do you have to have gone through the other process where somebody could just say, move along, move along. Yep, you got an A. Yep, you graduated. Here's a diploma, whatever. And then the college says, okay, come on in. That doesn't mean they know how to do anything. Whereas an entrance exam of the skills you need to be successful there does make more sense. Instead, they're dropping SATs, they're dropping all that. And now, as David says, there not all law schools weren't smart people that want to control who gets in. And then, that may be true as well. So we're going about it all backwards, which to me reinforces what you're saying about why would you go into debt to go into an institution that is behaving in a way that is not consistent with the way you would expect them to behave if excellence and actual learning and all that is their goal as
Yeah.
opposed to making money.
Yeah. Well, to go back, I think it was David who said that a lot of schools require a degree, or
Yeah.
a lot of jobs
A lot
rather
of
require a degree.
jobs,
So
yeah.
the thing about the degree is that it's just a proxy. It's just
Right.
a filtration mechanism, both for like companies and institutions adopt it for their hiring process, and the system uses it to push
Right.
you forward. Like there isn't actually a logical reason why you have to have a bachelor's degree in order to get into an advanced program. There's not something magic that comes along with it. You can gain all of the same skills elsewhere, but
Mhm.
it's much simpler to set up a system in the same way that like we filter information into categories. Like our brain works in categories, because otherwise it would just be way too much information. The amount of data that we're inputting on like by the millisecond is just way too much to process. So we have to categorize it and lump it
Yeah.
into categories so that we can process it more efficiently. And our systems work the same way, where you just
Right.
need these like proxies for, okay, this person has like a prerequisite level of intelligence, and they're able to like meet these standards and follow these rules, and they have this like baseline information, and so we can move them on to the next thing. And that's what, when corporations say degree required for a job, unless it's again legally required for you to get a certain type of certification, that is false. You don't need to have the degree to get the job and to do the job effectively. And so the college alternative program that I worked for, Praxis, was and still is a startup apprenticeship program. And basically it's a college alternative for kids who want to go work in the business world, but they don't want to spend 4 years in business school. So the way the
Mhm.
program works is you go through a 6-month professional development boot camp where you gain a bunch of professional skills and you build out this portfolio of projects that you've done that
Mhm.
serve as a stand-in for the degree, where it's like,
Right.
hey, and as a stand-in for experience, it's like, hey, I've never worked a job like this before. I've never done social media marketing for a startup, but look at these projects that I've done where I've done all of the same types of tasks that I would be doing in the job. And you can go look and you can see the quality of it. You can see the metrics of what I
Yeah.
accomplished. And then kids who go through Praxis land jobs all the time that have bachelor's degree required, and they're right in the job description. And nobody actually cares if you can prove that you can do the job in some other way. And
Right.
honestly, the bachelor's degree is a terrible mechanism for sorting people. Like you're using it as a prerequisite for, okay, they were able to commit to 4 years of school. They must have like some general bar of intelligence and academic competence. They kind of are going to like know how to fit into our systems because they finished the school system.
Right.
But most of the time that has nothing to do with whether or not somebody can do a job. And most of the things that you learned in college, you have to go, like you said, you have to go learn those things anyway. So the way people think about it's actually like a really primitive, kind of very basic, big brushstrokes understanding that people have about like what a college degree is and how it functions in like all of the moving gears and cogs of our
Right.
career system, because it's just sort of a catch-all for a lot of things.
I
And
actually think it's kind of a
isn't
pyramid scheme.
it, it
I really feel like it is. I mean, I feel like, I mean,
it's
pyramid scheme
definitely
might have,
some kind of scheme.
it's not, maybe that's not really the right, maybe that's not really the right term, but it's, they get, there are these guaranteed loans, and they go and they basically sell loans to kids to go to college on the promise of future earnings. The idea is, of course, that we're going to give you something, and they don't really give it to you, right? You still have to earn it. You still have to go there, and you still have to show up to class. You still have to get grades. It's not like you're paying for the piece of paper. You're paying for the opportunity to get the piece of paper, and you're paying for it with somebody else's money. And then, but that's their carrot. They're saying it with this piece of paper that you're going to get here, you're going to be able to go out and get a job, and you're going to be able to not only pay back this debt, but like make a life for yourself.
Yeah.
Except they then don't tell the person borrowing the money that that's going to be dependent on so many factors that are, that the student is going to choose, and that luck is going to, the economy, all kinds of things. Like, for example, they don't tell the student, so you probably shouldn't become like a sociology major or even an English major if you're going to borrow hundreds of thousands of dollars to get it, because you will never make as much money. I shouldn't say never, but it's highly unlikely. It's like
Yeah.
buying a lottery ticket that this piece of paper that you're buying for those hundreds of thousands of dollars is going to be your ticket to being a successful, whatever the heck you were hoping to be with your English major. Even if you become a professor, even if you become a tenured professor, it's a long slog to get there, and you still got all that debt to pay, and it's going to close doors, close choices for you. So they don't counsel these kids. They don't tell them that it's not just a magic piece of paper, and what they choose to major in makes a lot of difference. And then how well they do in the major, and whether they get a graduate degree on top of that. They just act like it's magical. And
Yeah.
it's a lie. It's, to me, it's predatory lending. I actually think there's more honesty in the mortgage broker loaning the pizza delivery guy $500,000 for his house than telling the kid coming in and majoring in, whatever, gender studies, that it makes sense to borrow, $300,000 to go to Harvard.
The expectations are definitely a lot more clear cut with the mortgages.
Yeah.
But this is such an important thing too, because like I said, in my experience, I thought I was on the college track all the way up until the doubt started in ninth grade. But it wasn't until halfway through my senior year of high school that I knew for sure that I wasn't going to college. And so much of, like, even in the very unique and tailored and customized and wonderful experience that I had, there was still a lot that we did that was tailored around making sure that I had all the boxes checked if I decided I was going to go to college. And there's so much about how people approach education starting all the way in kindergarten that is dictated by the assumption that someday my child has to get into a good college in order to get a good job and have a good life.
But we're
And
not raising college students. So I try to tell parents all the time, like, are you raising a college student or are you raising an adult?
But they still think that the college student is a necessary step in the process of becoming an adult. So you have to like, dismantling this assumption that you have to have college to be successful is just as important as dismantling all the assumptions around, like, my kid has to go to traditional school in order to be okay. Because once you've rid yourself of that assumption, just a world of possibilities opens up. If you're not trying to get your kid into college, like, what goal are you trying to prepare your child for? What goal are they excited about that they want to prepare themselves for, that you can go structure an entire education around? Like, maybe your kid wants to be a dressmaker, and you don't have to worry at all about all the prerequisite boxes that you have to check in order for your kid to get into school. And you can set them free to spend 8 hours a day learning how to design dresses and make dresses and color theory and learning about all these different fabrics and learning about how to get the best deals on fabric so they can buy in bulk and then make a whole line of dresses, and then learning about the business side of things where they figure out, wait, I can sell a dress on Etsy, or I can consign it at a local boutique, or I can start an online shop and I can learn all about how to run Shopify and how to do bookkeeping and how to process payments through Stripe, and all of these different things that your kid could have a fully fledged business by the time they graduate from high school, doing the thing that they love, if they get to pour all of their time and energy into that thing instead of wasting a bunch of time on a bunch of just arbitrary boxes that you're supposed to check because somebody once upon a time said, hey, successful people go to college, and then the whole world just fell in line because that became what you did.
Well, I would trade it in a minute. I would go back, had I known that those were options for me. I mean, the thing that stands out to me as a very schooled person, and unfortunately, prep school is designed to prep you for college. That's its whole purpose, right? So it was never a question. It was, you're going to college. It's how I grew up. And it wasn't until later, some years later, actually, when I decided to just check it all and go to cooking school. And my dad said, you really should have gone to the Culinary Institute or something in the first place. I'm like, I didn't know that was an option. Nobody, and it's sad to say, nobody told me, but when you have been pushed into this narrow little funnel by the adults in your life of this is where you go and this is what you have to do, and then you got to go to school, and what it kind of is. Nobody told me. I literally didn't know because it wasn't presented to me as any of these options. I was kept in this school box that I wasn't even able to go look for the options. I wasn't able to practice cooking when I was at prep school. I started cooking when I was 10. And absolutely loved it. My parents knew I loved it. And I loved it more than, than anything else that I did. But it was never even brought up as, hey, maybe you could turn this into a career. It was just not even discussed. no, you've got to go to school and go to college. And same thing you mentioned about the dressmaking. My two loves, real like passionate loves of what I love to do is cook and sew. And so, never would I've thought like those could have been careers. And I would trade all the books I read, all the tests I took, the degrees I have, and everything to be able to kind of go back in a time machine and do what you just described. You're describing the dressmaker thing. I'm like, that sounds absolutely wonderful. I would love that. But that those doors were closed.
Yeah.
And so now, I try to use the education I had to do this and try to educate parents and educate other people. But like, don't make that mistake that my parents made, because you might sit there and think like, oh, but you're a smart person and you read these books and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, and I would trade it all in a minute to do what I absolutely love. That would be a neat trick to turn around in your, late 30s or 40s and suddenly decide that's what you want your career to be. I mean, people have done it. I'm not going to
you
say it's not
can.
possible. You
But
can do it.
the doors become closed financially too, because you take on all the debt, and then you don't
Exactly.
have the luxury of spending a couple years starting up a business and getting it off the ground and getting it profitable, even if it would be successful in the long run,
Right.
because you have all these obligations that you've signed on to, for which
Yeah.
no 18-year-old should be making decisions that are going to impact them decades in
Well,
the future.
we let
Ever.
9-year-olds choose what sex they want to be. So, like, or not sex. Sorry. What? I'm not even going to go there. Anyway, well, we've already we said we were going to do an hour with these, so I don't want to like give it all away. We got to have a show for next time too. But so the show, the whole show that we're doing, Success Without School, is going to leverage, Hannah's experience, my experience, and we're going to bring you topics each week about the things that are a little more specific than what we just talked. We told Hannah's story and we talked about, what she was able to accomplish without college and so forth. But we're going to be brainstorming topics that get a little bit more granular than this. Sometimes we'll be inspirational. Sometimes we'll talk about something really nitty gritty. But the goal here is to help you, the audience, broaden your horizons. We hinted at a bunch of things today, right? Different kinds of careers, things you could do. But even on the K through 12 side, different ways to structure and design and define education for your children or even for yourselves. Like if you are an adult, young adult, and you're like, I got to start over or whatever, let's talk about it. Let's think about it. So that's what we're going to be doing on this show each week. And I really appreciate everybody who joined us today. I don't mean to like stop abruptly, but I'll let you wrap up. I just wanted to like make sure we got that in, because we said we would try to keep it to an hour so that people would feel like, yeah, I got an hour. Let's go listen to what they have to say about Success Without Schools.
Yeah, we want them to be
We could
excited
talk for hours, plural.
next week. Yeah, clearly we're going to have plenty to talk about over the next few weeks.
Exactly.
But yeah, I'm really excited to delve into more specifics as we go, especially if we get some questions from people to like real world applicable things that we can brainstorm onto. That's always a good time.
Yeah. So you guys, if you're listening, whether you're here now live or, watching in the replay and you put in the comments, if there are things you would like to hear about that have to do with, success outside the system, even if you are a teacher or somebody involved in the instructional side, if you're curious about the kinds of formats that Hannah's talked about, where she has taken advantage of different kinds of educational formats as a student, and you're listening as a teacher and you're saying, I wonder how I could do that. How do I get into doing that? Like actually being that kind of teacher and working with people like Hannah, as opposed to being stuck in the public school doing whatever it is they tell me. Because I don't think teachers who are, creative and passionate and have all, who love learning, I think they get a raw deal too in the system. So we can talk about that as well. So if you have questions, you have thoughts, that we should cover, definitely put it in the comments below. Anything that I missed? You want any final thoughts?
I don't think so. I'm just excited to do this again next week.
Yeah, me too. So don't forget, follow Rebel Educator. That's at Rebel capital E Educator on Twitter, and also Substack. It's coming soon, but Hannah's going to be working on that. She's got great content as far as just like lists and, write-ups about specific things, why your kid hates school, let's talk about socialization, all that kind of stuff. So really great content. Make sure you subscribe, and we will be back next week. So thanks everybody for watching, and we will catch you next time.
See you next week.